A pig stood in a medieval courtroom accused of murder. Witnesses spoke. The pig was convicted, and somehow this was a real trial. Not a joke, not folklore, not one of those fake history facts that sound like it came from a bloke at the pub who just discovered mead. This happened in medieval Europe, where animals could be arrested, judged, sentenced, and even executed in public, and pigs were among the most common defendants. That already sounds absurd, but the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Because in one case, a sow and her 6 piglets were accused after the death of a child. The sow was condemned, but the piglets were spared because the court could not prove they were involved. So this case file is not just asking, did medieval people really put pigs on trial? They did. The better question is this: why did people need a pig to stand accused in the first place? Tonight, we reopen one of medieval Europe's strangest trials, and by the end, the real case will not be whether the pig understood murder. It will be what people do when tragedy demands someone to blame. The case takes us to 1457 in Savigny in Burgundy, France. A 5-year-old boy was killed. The accused was a sow along with her 6 piglets. That sentence should not have a courtroom attached to it, but according to the records, this was treated as a legal case. The animals were not simply killed in the street, they were taken into custody. Their owner was pulled into the process. Witnesses were heard, lawyers were involved, a judge had to decide what happened next. And that is where the story stops being a weird medieval fact and starts feeling much darker. Because for the people involved, this was not a cartoon pig in a judge's wig. This was a dangerous animal in a world where pigs live much closer to humans than most of us are used to today. They moved through streets, yards, farms, and village spaces. They ate scraps, they searched for food, they were useful, valuable, and sometimes frightening. Modern pigs are often imagined as soft farmyard mascots, pink, slow, harmless, almost cute, but medieval pigs could be rougher, leaner, and more dangerous. They were strong animals with teeth, weight, and appetite. Around small children, that could become deadly. So when a child died, the village was not just dealing with an accident, it was dealing with grief, fear, and a question no one could ignore. Who was responsible? The pig? The owner? The parents? The village itself? A tragedy had happened, and someone had to carry the blame. But if this sounds like one strange local panic, the next exhibit changes the case, because Savigny was not the only one. The Savigny sow was not the only pig to face human justice. In 1386, in Falaise, Normandy, another sow was accused after her child's death. The pig was tried, condemned, and executed in public. Later accounts even describe the punishment as being made to mirror the injuries in the case. Brutal, yes, but in that world, punishment was often meant to be seen, understood, and remembered. That is the key. The trial was not only about removing a dangerous animal, it was a message. The law still had power. The community had not ignored the death. The wrong had been named, and the accused had been punished. Pigs appear again and again in these animal trial records, not because medieval people thought pigs were forming criminal gangs behind the barn, although honestly, if any animal was going to start a village racket, pigs would have the confidence. They appear because pigs were everywhere. They were common, they were valuable, they were strong, they were hungry, and they lived right beside humans. So when a pig killed, some communities did not treat it as random bad luck, they treated it as a crime. And that is the important shift. A child dies suddenly and violently. The village is shaken. The family is grieving. The animal's owner may be blamed. Rumours start, fear spreads, people want an answer. The court gives them one. It turns chaos into a case. But in Savigny, the court did something even stranger than convicting a pig. It separated guilt from suspicion, and that is where the piglets enter the file. The 6 piglets were accused too. Just sit with that for a second. A medieval court looked at baby pigs and decided it may need to establish their level of involvement. That sounds ridiculous, but It is actually one of the strongest details in the whole case, because the court did not simply condemn every animal nearby. The sow was judged responsible, the piglets were treated differently. Why? Because direct guilt could not be proved. That is the detail that makes this more than a weird fact video. The same legal world that could put a pig on trial for murder was also capable of saying the evidence against these piglets is not strong enough. But let's not make it sound better than it was. This was not modern justice. It was still a brutal system, and the sow was condemned. But the piglets matter because they show the trial had procedure. Witnesses mattered, proof mattered, the owner mattered, the animal's role mattered. The court was not laughing, the court was sorting blame, and that is what makes the case uncomfortable. Because if this was only superstition, you would expect everyone to be punished and everyone to move on. But that is not what happened. The court made a distinction. The sow was condemned, the piglets walked, and once you see that, the case becomes harder to dismiss. This was not just a village losing its mind, it was a society trying to make a disaster fit inside the law. But that leaves the biggest question hanging over the whole trial. If everyone knew a pig could not understand murder, why hold the trial at all? The easy answer is to say medieval people were stupid. That is also the lazy answer, and most of the time, lazy answers make lazy videos. Medieval Europe had beliefs and customs that look strange to us now, no argument there. But these trials also happened in communities with real problems to solve. Dangerous animals, dead children, angry families, valuable livestock, negligent owners, public fear, and legal systems trying to prove they could still control the world when something terrible happened. In many communities, local disputes could be settled with payment, apology, compensation, or agreement. But what happens when the harm is too serious for that? What happens when a child is dead? Money might settle damaged property. It might settle an injury. It might settle a fight between neighbours. But a dead child leaves a wound no payment can close. So the law steps in. It takes the horror out of rumour and puts it into a public frame. It says, this was not ignored. This was not hidden. This was not left for the village to whisper about till everyone blamed everyone else. The court names the accused. It hears witnesses. It creates a record. It delivers a sentence. That does not make the trial fair by modern standards, but it does make it understandable. The pig trial was not only about the pig, it was about restoring order after something unbearable. And this is where the story starts to feel less ancient than we would like, because humans still do this. When something awful happens, we look for a responsible figure, a villain, a failure, a face, a name, something to point at and say, there, that is why this happened. Medieval courts sometimes pointed at a pig. But before we laugh too hard, we should ask whether we are always that different, because the next exhibit shows the trial was not just about justice, it was also a performance. The Falaise case shows how public these punishments could become. This was not just removing a dangerous animal from the village. This was staged justice. The pig was accused. The pig was condemned. The punishment was visible. Everyone could see that the court had acted, and in the medieval world, that visibility mattered. Justice was not always quiet or private. Punishments, declarations, rituals, and executions were often public. They were meant to send a message. The message was simple. The law still stands, even when the accused has whose. That sounds absurd, but the courtroom has always been a kind of stage. The robes, the bench, the formal words, the witnesses, the records, all of it tells the public this is not just revenge, this is order. In pig trials, that performance became extreme. A dangerous animal became a criminal defendant. A tragedy became a legal story. A village's fear became a verdict. And the performance may have been aimed less at the pig than at the people watching. The pig could not understand deterrence, but the owner could, the neighbours could, the parents watching their own children could, the community could. Executing a pig did not teach pigs not to kill, but it may have taught humans that animals had to be controlled, that neglect could have consequences, and that the authorities were watching. So yes, the pig was the defendant, but humans were the audience. And that leads to the darker possibility at the centre of this case. Was the pig punished because it was guilty, or because people needed guilt to land somewhere? In the Savigny case, the owner was also pulled into the proceedings. That detail matters, because whenever a domestic animal harms someone, there is another question sitting behind the obvious one. Who was supposed to control it? A pig does not build a fence. A pig does not decide where it is allowed to roam. A pig does not sign a village safety agreement, mostly because the handwriting would be dreadful and the hoofprint would not hold up in court. The human owner makes these choices. So when a pig killed, the court was not only looking at the animal, it could also be looking at neglect, supervision, property, and responsibility. That is where the case starts to feel more modern, because we still ask versions of this question today. If a dog attacks someone, we do not put the dog in a suit and ask for motive. We ask about the owner. Was the animal controlled? Were there warnings? Had it shown danger before? Could someone have prevented it? The difference is that medieval courts sometimes kept the animals at the centre of the ritual. The pig became the visible accused. But behind the pig was a human system. Ownership, duty, family, reputation, fear. And in a small village, those things could explode quickly. Blaming only the owner might start a feud. Blaming the parents would be unbearable. Calling it pure accident might make the court look useless. So the pig became the perfect defendant, visible, dangerous, present at the scene, easy to punish, and unable to defend itself in any meaningful way. That is the part that makes this case darker than the headline. The pig was not just an animal in the dock, it was a place to put grief, anger, and social pressure. But now we have to decide what the evidence actually says. Were these trials real justice, or were they humans using justice to control fear? So what does the evidence actually say? First, the core claim is confirmed. Medieval and early modern courts really did put animals on trial, and pigs were among the most common animal defendants. The Savigny case shows a sow and 6 piglets accused after the death of a child. The sow was condemned. The piglets were spared because direct proof against them was lacking. Other cases, including Falaise, show this was not a one-off village fever dream. So the evidence verdict is clear. Confirmed. Medieval pig trials were real, but the cartoon version of the story does not hold up. This was not simply people in the past were dumb. That explanation is too easy, too smug, and too useful for making ourselves feel smarter than people who lived in a very different world. The stronger answer is this. These trials happened because medieval communities lived close to dangerous animals, had legal systems built around public punishment, and needed a way to restore order after shocking harm. The court did not need the pig to understand murder like a human would. It needed the community to see that the danger had been named. It needed responsibility to be sorted. It needed chaos turned into a case. That makes the trial strange. It makes it brutal. It makes it unfair to the animal by modern standards. But it does not make it meaningless. The law was doing what law often does after tragedy. It was creating a story people could live with. And that brings us back to the title of this case. The pig was convicted of murder. But the real trial was never only about the pig. It was about what humans do when a death feels too awful to leave unanswered. Sometimes we seek truth, sometimes we seek order, and sometimes history shows us the uncomfortable space where those two things are not the same. The real case was not whether a pig understood guilt, it was whether humans needed a guilty figure so badly that even an animal could be dragged into the machinery of justice. That is why this story still matters. From a distance, a medieval pig trial sounds ridiculous, but underneath it is something very human. A tragedy happens, a community panics, the public wants certainty, the system needs a verdict, and someone, or something, becomes the accused. That pattern did not stay in medieval France. It follows people through history, and in my Lindy Chamberlain video, we look at one of Australia's most infamous modern examples of that same dangerous instinct. A mother said a dingo took her baby, but instead of being believed, she was judged by the public, judged by the media, and eventually judged by a court system that got it terribly wrong. So, if this case made you wonder how quickly fear can turn into blame, watch that video next, because sometimes the strangest evidence in a case is not what people saw, it is what they wanted to see.